Hello, welcome back. So we're going to do some editing here of an upcoming episode covering the movie The Crucible. Hear my dog barking in the background? It's a great way to start, right? Live stream. That's the way it goes. All right, well, fortunately, we're not actually recording an episode. Otherwise, I would stop and start over once the dogs start barking in the background. But with a live stream, we just keep going. That's the benefits of live. So let's get into this. Let's start editing. So I've explained this before. I'll do a quick review. So basically, the way I record each one of these is an edit point, and then this is going to be a big break. So this is the introduction. This is the two truths and a lie game, and then this is going to be a bulk of the episode here, and then the outro down here. So this basic process is going to be, I know that each one of these sections, so like at the end of this section, I made a mistake while I was recording, said something, whatever it was that I made a mistake. And so I re-recorded that sentence or paragraph or wherever that flow kind of was, and just need to come in here and make all of these edits. If you watch the last live stream that I did editing an interview, for another upcoming episode, that took quite a bit of time. And after the live stream, I think the live stream was like an hour and 20 minutes, and then I ended up doing another 3 hours or so of editing later. This should not take that long since it's something that I recorded. And that's very fitting. So you can see right there, that's an edit point. So, of some sort. The reason why it doesn't take as long for my stuff is because I'm familiar with it. I know what it was that I said, and it's all scripted. So this is all scripted, and so it's a very different process than a conversation that you would get with an interview. Just different types of editing. Pull open. Here we go.
Now, the last thing to do before... Got him? A quick recap. Now, the last thing...
Check the timing.
To see how well you did. Now, the last thing to do...
A little bit more.
You did. Now, the last thing to do before...
Here we go.
It is on a completely pay-what-you-want model. It's just she did. And head... Now, if you want to be /support. All right. It is on a... You...
Find where that piece is there.
It is on a...
There we go.
It is...
Cut that on.
Whatever you want. It is... Whatever you want. It is on...
There we go. All right, so that is...
accuracy of the Crucible.
There we go.
So before we continue...
Let me make sure real quick. I'm going to hop over my other... Okay, yeah. I wanted to make sure that I had the system sounds turned on so you could actually hear that.
So before we continue further...
And it looks like they are, so everything should be good.
Of time or date. So before we continue... That's the boat who's from. That's the boat who's...
So this process is not, I mean, it's not, it's just audio editing.
Was from. That's... Ale was from. That's the boat...
And I'm kind of, you want to space a little bit of space in between the sentences there, because everybody pauses between sentences.
We start to get each girl. We start to get the sense.
So I typically try to keep it like those pauses between sentences, I try to keep it relatively similar to what I had when I was speaking in the flow. So you can see this break here. So I'm going to cut this in and then kind of remember it was around here and have it something
sort
like
of a
that.
symbol. We start to get a sense of their...
That way it's a little more natural.
At this point, Proctor, get her John Proctor. At this point,
It's a little too long.
Proctor, get her John Proctor. At this point,
There we go.
we don't have to wait long to find out what it is. Abigail takes... She said, that is a bad thing. Abigail takes the dead... We don't have to wait long to find out what it is. Abigail takes the...
Okay, so I changed that introduction. That's why it's a little bit different. Even though it's scripted, there's some ad-lib in there sometimes.
She said, that is a bad thing. We don't have to wait long to...
Note to myself, so no edit continue. So that means that there was no mistake here at the end. I just stopped for whatever reason. Could be anything. Maybe I was getting a sip of coffee. Maybe I was just scrolling down the page, whatever it might be. Sometimes while I'm recording, I'll notice that there's a typo or some sort of grammatical mistake in the script, and I'll go back and try to fix that right
We
there.
haven't come across... At least, not really.
So, who knows what the reason was for this? I don't remember, but leave myself a little note that to not bother trying to find anything over here to get rid of because there's nothing.
Not really. We haven't come... This is a quote from... Now, this is a quote from... .com. This is a quote from...
Okay, so again, we have no edit here, but this is going to be a quote from a book, Reverend Hale's book from the 1600s. And so what I'm going to do, oops, not a new project, sorry, new track. I'm going to pull this into a new track because we'll add an effect to it later on. That way we know listening to it, I try to keep it a subtle effect, but that way you know subtly that this is different. This is an actual quote as opposed to something that I've written. So I'm going to pull this down here, and I don't need that anymore. This is the end of the quote. So this here, I'm going to keep the same effect for now. So for this point in the edit, everything is going to be exactly the same as far as the sound is concerned. We'll add that effect later on.
Part of it all. The start of it all. I fear some... And she was afterward... And she was after...
I tell you though,
likeness of a coffin. And she was after...
reading, this isn't the first time I've read really, really old quotes, 1700s, even earlier sometimes. And I try to do it. I do it word for word. So like it is exactly what they said. I'm not converting it to modern English. And sometimes the order of words, the way that they phrase things, it takes you a couple seconds to understand what they're trying to say. And so a lot of times I'll have to go back and reread it and be like, wait, what are they trying to say, so that I can get the pacing right, while still saying it word for word the way they wrote it back in the 1600s, which is
another,
like this right here. So I remember that. So this was, it started with another,
and I was...
But when I went back and read it, what they're saying is, and Reverend Hale was saying, oh, there's another one that I witnessed throwing these fits, right?
Another I was called to pray with, being...
So another, it was just a really weird way of starting it, saying they just said another instead of another one or another person or another girl or whatever. It was just another. Okay. It's kind of it's a different way of phrasing things back then. That's for sure. Makes it a little tricky to record it sometimes.
Wound thereby. Another.
And then that is the end of the quote here. So I don't need this anymore.
Sending to the god of Ekron to inquire.
And then we're back to the normal part of the episode here.
Did you catch the mention of the choir? Did you catch of Ekron to inquire? Did you catch the mention of...
A little bit more of a break there between the quote and that.
On the other side of that... On the other side of that...
There we go. Cut that in.
That went into the Salem witch trials hysteria. On the other side of that...
And then again, we have another quote. So there's quite a few quotes in here. This one's from the Bible, one of the things that's mentioned in the movie. So this here.
And 20. And 20. When they say unto you, there's no light in them.
Go.
In them. Earlier, when I was quoting from Reverend Hale's book, light in them.
There's
in them.
a little bit of a mouth click there.
In them.
Oh, that's at the beginning of this.
There is no light in them. Earlier, when I...
There we go. Control S. Hit save. It's a good idea to save every so often. Frequently.
That comes from whom I shall... Divine unto me by the... He asks the witch to, quote, divine... That comes from first... That comes from first... That...
Control T. Cut that.
That comes of Endor. That comes from first... He asks the witch. He asks the... The city of Endor. He asks...
Now, you'll have to listen to the full episode to get the whole story and context here. But, so the movie is talking about... it references some scripture verses and stuff, and I'm trying to give some more context into why some of the beliefs of that time, the Puritan beliefs in particular, for that, and why they might have some of the thought process kind of behind that. Of course, there's no excuse, but
but things didn't. As the story goes, as that story goes, as the...
I mean, by I mean there's no excuse for the...
Unto thee, end quote.
What essentially amounted to murder, legalized murder.
Unto thee, end quote. As that story goes.
I'm noticing something here on the stream. Let me cut this down a little bit. There we go. A little bit of extra headroom there that I don't really need. There we go. I just squished it.
The others in the room are the girls. The others in the room.
So my thought process, kind of going back to that a little bit there, my thought process for explaining some of that and explaining some of the scriptures behind it to at least try to understand some of the context and some of the reasons why something like this might have happened.
The others in the room, Dr. Griggs, she sleeps.
At least as much as we can.
Yet, she sleeps. The others in the room...
I don't think we'll ever fully understand everything.
She sleeps. The others in the...
But that's the way history is, I guess. Is that another point? Is it? What is that?
The others in the room. The others in the room are.
That's weird. It's so this is the clip duplicated. So this is exactly the same.
A brief narrative and a brief narrative.
So that's what Mixcraft does when watch. So if I take this and I scale this up, you can see it's just gonna cycle that clip. So for some reason that entire clip got scaled out. Not sure why. So that brings up a good point though, because as part of my process, once I've gone through this entire editing process, and this isn't something that I'll do a live stream on because I do it while I'm listening to podcasts while I'm driving or anytime or going for a walk or whatever I'm listening to podcasts for. I'll throw in this episode into my queue, and so that way I can listen to it and make sure that there's no editing mistakes. So as I'm listening to that, I'll keep an ear out around half-hour mark or so, and just make sure that everything's good before actually publishing it live.
This is a quote from his. A brief narrative. He's not in the movie, and he wrote. This is a quote from his. This is a quote from his book. This is.
So yeah. So this episode doesn't come out for a few months yet. A couple months, I think, in beginning of November.
And he wrote about what he saw. This is what he saw. This is a quote.
So, this is another quote. So all of this can come down to this track here. Check my message. I got a message.
On the night from Reverend Lawson's experience. On the 19th experience. On the 19th day.
That's pretty good. Spacing there.
But suddenly. And spake to me. But suddenly.
Things like that. Spake to me instead of speak to me. Or it spoke to me.
Presently after she said there was.
Or that. Presently after
She said there was good wife and wish several times. Presently after. And she said good wife N. And she said good wife N. And she said good wife N. She stands. And she said good wife N offered her. There was good wife N. And said, do you not see her? Why, there she stands. And she said good.
Go. End of the quote. So again, no edit point right here. Just pull this over. Looks like I made it all the way to the next quote before an edit too.
In other fits. The minister, Mr. P, mentioned is Reverend.
No edit there, so this is another quote. Bring that down to this track and get rid of this marker now. Oh, still playing. Oops. I want to make sure not to cut that in. So I undo back enough to where I had deleted that marker, so I knew it wasn't accidentally
First.
some audio.
The number of afflicted on Monday, the 21st. The number of Monday, the 21st. The number of afflicted Mercy Lewis at 3 maids, Mercy Lewis, Mercy Lewis, Mercy Lewis, Mercy Lewis, Mercy Lewis.
there. Pretty quick edit.
Maids, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis at Thomas. 3 maids, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis at Thomas Putnam. There were 3 girls from and did vehemently biting. These were
Wait.
There were 3 girls from 9 to 12 Griggses. There were 3 girls
All the way back there.
at Dr. Griggs's. There were 3 girls Griggs's. There were 3 girls from 9 to
So there's a breath there, and I could take it out.
at Dr. Griggs's. There were 3 girls
Yeah, I think I will.
Dr. Griggs's. Dr. Griggs's. There were 3 girls from 9 to 12.
Sometimes I'll leave them in. I don't take out all the breaths because people breathe. And if you take out all the breaths, it starts to sound too robotic, I think. But that might be an opinion. It is an opinion.
Strangling, etc. You'll notice the mention pinching, strangling, etc. You'll notice the
Okay.
on the other side of the of Abigail Williams. She played the part of Abigail Williams. On the other side of the that makes it an that makes an affair between a that makes it an affair
Cut there.
during the shooting of the movie. That makes it an
Control S, save.
and since John Proctor 8 months and 7 days old. And since John Proctor, we see it happen when accusations after Reverend Parris, if that's true, we see it happen when movie's timeline, the accusations begin. We see it happen when Reverend Hale head back to the movie's timeline, the accusations begin. Cut
this in a little bit.
If we head back to the movie's timeline, the accusations.
Don't like that breath there.
If we head back to the movie's timeline, the accusations begin. We see it happen when Reverend Hale arrives in town. After Reverend Hale gathers up all the Parris tells him about the boiling pot. Hale gathers up sort of like we heard Jr. and Elizabeth Hubbard. Sort of like we heard from. Oh, and she also didn't go to church as she also didn't. Oh, and she also didn't. Of her servants. Oh, and she also didn't go to church as much as people thought that she should. Race and cultural. Parris's slave. Race and cultural. According to the movie, there's a montage of sorts as back in the movie we see a court is set up to get. According to the movie, there are 3 judges. There's a montage of sorts as we see Judge Danforth. According to the movie, there are this. Bottom of this. To the bottom of this. Court is set up to get to the bottom of this.
Got that little breath there.
A court is set up to get to the bottom of this. According to set up to get to the bottom of this. According to the movie, there are
pull over more. So I like to just pull over a few and then just kind of crank on those.
raising the two Ruth Paris, the elderly Mr. raising two sticks in it.
And then do more. Rinse and repeat, pretty much.
Raising the elderly Mr. Jacobs laughs at this. Raising the two.
A little less of a break there since I ended on a higher note.
Mr. Jacobs laughs at this. Raising the two sticks in his hands, he points out to the three judges that he has to walk with two sticks. How am I supposed to get through a window? What we see here in the movie, the only one the movie, what we see in the movie, what we see here in the movie with the Jacobs is sentenced to be hanged. What we see here in the movie with this court and the three is sentenced to be hanged. What we And Jesus said to them, saying, and Jesus said to them.
It's another scripture, but
What these are saying? And Jesus said to them.
sometimes for some quotes like that, I'll just say quotes. And then sometimes I won't, and I'll put the effect on it. Pretty much just to kind of change it up.
For example, that scripture, and it did. For example,
In that case, that was just one sentence of a scripture, so didn't seem to, change it up from before where we will add the effect to it and just kind of have it be just a quote and then a few words as a sentence.
and it did. For example, and it did. For example, basically, what we now know as the Glorious Revolution. Basically, those last two, it was rebellion ended, and the persecution in the last two weren't even in the movie. Those last two weren't even in the movie. Bartholomew Gedney.
That's
Bartholomew Gedney. Those last Bartholomew Gedney. Those last two. Replacing Danforth. James II either. Replacing Danforth. The three judges, and right now you might be wondering, the three judges who were in court. The three judges.
Wait.
The three judges.
Yep. Make sure I deleted the right one.
In May of 1692. The three judges. And right now you might be wondering right now. Other one that we do see in the movie, John Hawthorne. And right now you might He joined in May of Thomas Danforth. He joined in May.
Pull over some more up until this transcript.
Again, but he isn't so sure. Again, but he isn't so sure. Again, this is an oversight. He asks Martha Corey. He asks Martha is questioning Martha Corey. Is questioning Martha Corey. He asks Martha. And we know that because, so maybe that's why they changed it. Oh, and record of, we know that because this comes, well, the overall, that particular, it's probably it's not with, oh, and movie's version, because this comes from a book, because we know that.
Right there.
Simplified. Is simplified. And we know that because.
All right, so this is transcript, and this is actually transcript from the court records from the Salem witch trial. And again, you can see all the edits in there just for this little bit right here. I mean, not that I don't make mistakes outside of that, but there's a lot of mistakes in there, and it's because they write differently, and they speak differently, and so I found it kind of tough to read. Again, trying to still have it be word for word with what was actually said, not trying to change it to be modern English, so it might sound kind of strange saying it, but it's the way it was written.
Seemingly by Bridget. The examination of Bridget Bishop at I take conversant in. I take all this, hath this woman.
See, hath this woman?
I am clear. Hath this woman heard.
Very Shakespearean.
Mary Walcott.
Sort of, I mean, for obvious reasons.
I never was in this place before. Mary Walcott. I have no familiarity. Why have you not? I have no familiarity.
I said that was funny. I had a hard time saying that word.
I have no familiarity.
Familiarity? Say that 10 times fast. Oh, well.
How do you know then? How do you know? I know not what a witch is. How do you know then? It may be you do not. It may be afflicted were turned up. It may be you do not know. Note. I did not hear them. I did not hear them. Note.
So I want to add, so this is a note after, I mean, it's still part of the transcript, but it was actually a note that they wrote after the fact, not necessarily the interaction between them. So this is kind of the back and forth between the judge and Bridget Bishop. In the movie, it's an interaction between the judge and Martha Corey, because Bridget Bishop's not in the movie. And then this is kind of a note after the fact. So I wanted to include that, but it's little bit of a kind of a break there to kind of show that it's a little bit, it's after, but then we'll still have the effect on it so that you'll know it's a quote.
Mr.
Sam Paris.
Her also. Mr. Sam Paris being
Signed.
Bridget Oliver. Signed, John Hawthorne.
Okay.
That's just the John Hawthorne. That's just Of course, we are. Of course. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. Of course, we are. If you have the prayer continues at this point, the camera. If you hear it, if you have the closed caption. At this point, we hear a noise. At this point, we hear a noise. If you have the closed captions turned. And just like most of the another noise. And just like most of this movie.
A little bit too long of a pause there. Pull that in.
Another noise. And just like...
Hit save. Okay, so I know we're like 37 minutes into this stream, but I should have mentioned this in the beginning. I just thought of this. Let me know if my mic audio and the system audio are vastly different. I've watched some live streams where like the playback is great and you can hear it fine, and then the person talking is really, really quiet. And so like the actual mic here is actually really, really quiet. I tried to balance it beforehand in the settings. I made some adjustments to try to balance it out, and as far as I can tell, it's good. But I also cannot actually hear myself through the live stream through this microphone here, so I can't hear that as it's going without starting up another system with the live stream or whatever and actually testing that. So if you notice a discrepancy, by all means let me know, and I'll continue to play around with the settings to get it to be right, because I want it to be something where you can hear both the system, which of course is me talking as well, and then this microphone too, without having it bounce back and forth.
That brings us to the death.
So, yeah, let me know.
And we probably never will. That brings us. Probably it was because John was that probably the closest part. Probably the closest part that he shows. The movie shows. Probably the closest part.
It's noticeably quiet. It is okay. Okay. Is this better? Ken says that in the chat. He says it's noticeably quiet. So I just turned it up a little bit. And hopefully that's better. Hopefully. We'll wait and see if he says something.
One tidbit I thought was one interesting tidbit. One tidbit. Accusations turned to him too. One tidbit.
Okay, good. Turned it up.
At the very end of the reason it ended was more. The reason it ended. Executions. The reason it ended, at least according to the movie, was because.
And I think that's the end.
Century imprisoned in 7th century.
Nope, it's not the end. Hold on. Oh, this is the outro. Yeah, all this. So this is another quote here. So I'm going to pull this down. I can get rid of these, and then I can just pull all of it over at once. Make these edits here.
That number also does. His wife Martha would be executed by hanging. That number also does not include. Be executed by hanging. That number also does not include another 4. Others say it was a land in the movie. Others say it was a case. 5 years later, what they'd done. 5 years later, for what they'd done. 5 years later.
Okay. Here's a quote. This is actually the apology from.
Saying, I desire to be. Whereby their less crimes, whereby.
From one of the girls who was one of the accusers. She was like only one of the girls that I'm aware of.
Less crimes.
That actually apologized for her participation in it.
Grievous crimes, whereby their life. Crimes, whereby their. Crimes, whereby their. And that it was a great. Persons, and that it was. Persons, and that it was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that.
So, the twist of irony I found in that quote, and one of the reasons I included it was because, the whole Salem witch trials, they're accusing people of witchcraft and devilry, and then her apology was, the devil made me do it, essentially.
5 years later, in sad time. 5 years later. But as best as I can tell. It wasn't even a thing back then. But as best as I. Then, for hundreds. Then. Today's U.S. dollars. Then.
Okay, so that is the end of the episode, and then this is the outro. I actually have a little bit of a longer outro. I had email that I listed here, so this is the email. Let me pull this down. And this will be the outro edit.
This episode of, or there was the 1970s. Spilled over into nearby towns. Or there was the 1970s. On one hand, you were fake working. Those who were accused. And of course, you can't. On one hand, choice. On one hand, or there's the transcript, a modest inquiry, or there's the that's another book.
So
A modest, or
So here, I'll give you an example. So here's the title, just some of the 16th century reading that 17th century reading that I got to do while researching this episode. This is the title of one of the books of one of the guys that was, one of the reverends that was actually there and gave some firsthand accounts of what he experienced. So this is just the title of his book.
a modest inquiry into the nature of witchcraft and how persons guilty of that crime may be convicted, and the means used for their discovery discussed both negatively and affirmatively according to Scripture and experience.
That's it. That's the title. That's the title of his book. Just kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? There were others that had similarly great descriptive titles.
Because of their age, the history of those are all of it. Because of their age, the history of there were some others. They were my primary. Because of their age.
There we go.
Were there. Because of their age.
And one little bit here.
Okay, before wrapping things up, I'm going to call this one true. Recently.
Okay, so this is introducing the email. Great email that I got.
The time of its execution. Okay.
Has nothing to do with the Crucible, but guy who was talking about the right stuff. Get some good information.
Chalmers slip. Jaeger mythos. Chalmers. Goodland had inherited. It's
a longer email, but I think it's worth it. Has some good info to add to that story.
The book depicts at the start of the book. Goodland had in a handshake. In a hang like Ontario. In a handshake like Ontario. In a handshake This was especially breaking the sound barrier. This was especially I suspect Wolf convenient excuse. I suspect Don. When I got his email, that brings us
and the end of the episode.
Being as open, and that brings us to an end. Overshadowed characters in the movie. That brings us to
which still goes on for a little bit. I had a little bit of an explanation here of what I'm doing.
With that said, hopefully, so with that said, each and every episode. With that said, and then of course, on the flip side, and money goes into creating podcasts. podcasts. And then, of course,
so basically what I'm trying to do, and I started doing this recently. This is one of the first episodes that I'm doing it. That's why I'm kind of explaining it kind of towards the end here, is I'm going to start putting in how much time and money goes into each episode. Never heard podcasts do that before, and I thought that might be a nice way to hopefully I can encourage other podcasters to start doing the same kind of thing, and can kind of peel back the curtain some. So what got me started on this is there was, well, I'm in a lot of podcast communities online and even locally, but there's a lot of people, anytime somebody starts a podcast, they dive into it and they love it and it's so much fun. And then inevitably at some point they start to burn out. And the average for podcasts in the industry is roughly 7 to 10 episodes before somebody burns out. That's kind of what people have determined, looking at stats of active shows, active being podcasts that have released something in the past year or so. And so podcasts that are no longer active, you look at how many episodes they released before they burned out or before they stopped for whatever reason. And basically the average is 7 to 10 episodes. And of course, we'll never know exactly the reason why, but looking at a lot of communities and a lot of people who are new to podcasting, I think a lot of the reason why that is, this is my personal theory, is that they don't really realize how much work goes into creating a podcast. They think you just hook up a mic and then you're good to go, and that's it. And for some shows, perhaps that may be the case. Some are easier than others. But any way you look at it, no matter what the podcast is, even the easier ones, there's a lot of work that goes into creating a podcast. And so that's kind of what my thought process here is. I'll share the time and money that goes into each episode. I could get more granular, but I figure that's a good place to start. In this one in particular, I think it was like $10 because all of the resources were from the 17th century. So I didn't have to pay for them, which was made it really cheap.
Until we chat again, and bye for now. Thanks. Until we chat.
So the big thing on my podcast in particular is time. I think this episode is bordering on it's going to get
.com. Until we chat again, and bye for now.
26 hours I think is what this one totaled up to create. All right, so we are done with this edit here. So let me save this. Copy this path, save this as version 3, so incremental save. And once that's saved, now I can start to add the music. Pull open Explorer here again to add the music. So there's 1 and there's 2. This one goes at the end, and this one goes at the beginning. Actually, this one also goes at the end, so I'll put that there. No, I'll edit this one first. So 5 seconds, 5 seconds roughly is where this kicks in. And that's just because I've edited this enough with the same here that I know how that goes.
Hello and welcome to
that timing right there, and it's good. All right, so with that, now I need to come to the end of the introduction. Ken says, clever idea in the chat room. I didn't notice it. That's probably for the time and money thing. Thank you. I'm hoping that realistically, I don't expect a lot of people to I don't necessarily expect other podcast hosts to start to do that just because I am, but for two reasons. A lot of people don't track their time to know, they don't know really how long it takes, and another part is that a lot of people don't like to talk about money, and that's just the way it goes.
This is based on a true story.
But that's okay. If nothing else, I'm hoping that doing that will help people who listen to it start to get an idea of the time and effort it takes to create podcasts, and hopefully it'll be a little more positive for people who like to enjoy the free entertainment on the other side of it.
Before starting our story today,
and this is the outro again right here.
all right, now let's begin our dive into the historical accuracy of the Crucible.
Whoops, that's not good timing.
Into the historical accuracy of the Crucible.
And before that last note ends, start talking again.
It's dark. Winona Ryder's character.
Okay. Now I need this again at the end of the episode.
16 place in 1692.
And then the ending.
This episode of Based on a True Story.
And this audio here, this is the 30-second version of that same song. I had somebody ask recently if this music is an original composition, and it is not. This is stock music that I found. I went through a lot of different stock music, and I ended up sticking with this because I think it's kind of a good...
Produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. Wow.
I think it's kind of a good mixture of a lot of different genres that we cover. If you listen to Based on a True Story, early on, I used to try to find a different song for every single episode, and it was all royalty free stuff. But I tried to find, like covering The Pianist, I would cover some classical piano music, right? Because that just seemed to fit with that. Covering a Western movie, I'd try to find a country style theme or something, trying to kind of match it with the movie. And then I ended up deciding not to do that anymore because it's an ongoing cost.
Bye for now.
There's a mixture of that, the ongoing cost side of it, but also, actually, I also think that a lot of times a consistent theme is kind of nice. So it's not different every time. But I would be lying if I said that cost did not play a huge factor into it. Buying all those different songs when I could use that money to, buy more research material or do another episode. And at the end of the day, the music is not the primary purpose of the podcast, right? It's the content. Okay, so this is edited here. Now what I need to do, before I actually edit these quotes and add that sound effect to it, what I'm going to do Let's add a new track. I need to clean my vocal track. And really, let me save this here as a new version. And really what I'm going to do is mute my music and export this. Export that. As that exports, I will launch Isotope and Audition, because those are the next two steps in the editing process. You need to pass it through Isotope first to clean it, and then pass it into Audition at the very end. So I might as well launch those now. And I notice the stream's going a little bit choppy as those launch. So I apologize for that. I probably, maybe in retrospect, I should not have launched both of those at the exact same time while it's exporting. First up is Isotope, but really all we're doing here, I can minimize that and that. What we're doing right now, I gotta wait for this. You can see down here at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see it's creating. It's creating the file. It's exporting that WAV file that we need to clean. So at this point, it's just sit here and wait. This part of the process is waiting. That's pretty much all it is. What is it at? 25%? Almost there. Not quite. Not quite. Not quite. So walking you through what the next steps of this are. Once this is done exporting, and then I'm going to bring it into Isotope, clean it. So by clean it, what I mean is there's going to be a little bit of a hiss, and really that comes from my setup. It has to do with the microphone, and I think actually it's some of the cables. I've swapped them out, but there's a little bit of that hiss in there that didn't used to be there when I used my DBX 286S. It's a great microphone, and I did not have, or great piece of audio hardware. And when I was using that in my setup, I didn't have to run through this cleaning process. The audio was great; it would work in there. But now that I've changed, really so what happened there was I had the 286S and it was great, and I used it with my condenser microphone, a Rode NT1. Great setup, absolutely loved it. And then one day there was a storm and it knocked out the 286S. Recording with that, I just came in to record one day, and after the storm, and there was this really bad buzzing noise, and I think the preamp got knocked out. So rather than replacing that equipment, it was cheaper to buy a dynamic microphone instead of a condenser, since that helps eliminate some of that background noise natively in the actual microphone itself, just by nature, the dynamic versus condenser. So I replaced the microphone with a dynamic mic and essentially bypass. I don't use the 286S anymore because it's no good. But that workflow has now introduced a slight little bit of hiss. That's really only noticeable when I'm using my headphones. If I listen to the episode in my car, if I listen to it while I'm doing chores around the house, or I'm going, out for a stroll, then I don't notice it on the in-ear headphones or others. It's really just kind of when I'm in a quiet room with these in. So realistically, I probably could let it go. But I prefer not to do that, since you only get one shot at releasing this here. So I'm just going to run it through this extra little step here of exporting, having iZotope do a clean on it, which iZotope is an amazing. Actually, iZotope is, I believe, the company. It's RX Elements is what I use. Standard is great as well. It's much more expensive, but I think you're talking, over $1,000 versus like $150 for Elements, and even cheaper if you find it on sale like I did. So great little program to run that through. That's going to clean the audio, give me a nice clean track. I'm going to take that and throw that track. So basically all of these edits that we did here, all of these edits, essentially I'm rendering it down. So I'm rendering this all down into a single file. So I'm going to get one file that is from start to finish, that track. And then that track is what I'm going, or that one file is what I'm going to clean. And then once I do that, I'm going to take these quotes here and I'm going to duplicate this track and apply the quote effect, which is an effects chain that I've built to kind of make it obvious that I'm reading from a quote, or reading from something, so it's an actual quote. So that's essentially what I'm going to do with that. And these obviously are not cleaned, and so with that effect you're going to get a little bit of that hiss, but the effect is going to be on that track anyway, and so you're not going to really notice it because we've got that effect, that quote effect that you'll hear once this is done. So that's the basic process for that, what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And we still have roughly 10% of this file that it needs to build. It's rendering all this down. And if I hop over here, you can see this file. And so if I hit F5 on my keyboard, see this file. Oh, nope, let me find my size, file size. Get rid of all these. I don't care about that stuff. Actually, let me do this. It's not music. Oops, even though it's audio, it's not music. I don't care about that. Okay, that changed that. So I have the size. Okay, so now if I hit F5, you can see the size should update. See, as it's building this out, this file size is gonna get larger and larger. So it's up to 300 and almost 335 megs. As it builds, as this builds in the background. 78, 79, hit F5, you can see, or right click and refresh. %, 20% to go, almost there. This is the riveting part of audio editing, waiting for this to export. Almost there. I said that like 10% ago. Now it's really almost there. 6%. 5. Took a second to update that. Almost there, almost there. All right, so with that done, here in 1%, it will be done. There we go. All right, so that's done. Let's pull open Elements now. So this file is done. I can pull it in. And here you can see the kind of that little bit of hiss right there. You can visually see it. I'll show you what it looks like with nothing. So you can see clean over here, and then you can see that little bit. And if I'll play this and see if you can hear it on your end. Can you hear that? I'll do it again. That's what we're removing, is that little bit of hiss right there. So you can see as the playhead goes to the little hiss. It's very subtle. I can hear it in my headphones, and I see it's there, so I know I'm not hearing things. But it's pretty easy to get rid of here in Isotope. I'm going to basically come into your denoise. I'm going to remove hiss. We could learn, so here's a couple different ways we can do this. One, we could come in here, we can select this and say, this is the noise, learn from that, and then it'll get rid of it in the file. Or we can go into adaptive mode, and that's usually what I like to do, because then Isotope is going to essentially do its smart thing. Ken in the chat says he heard nothing. Yes, it's there. I can see it. You can visually see it. It's there. If you have good headphones and you're in a studio, you'll hear it. And I'm going to get rid of it so you don't hear it. But yeah, extra little step. So with that, I'm going to come in, set this to around 8. And then control like the entire file, and Now this is the new waveform. Now if you notice, it's there's not as much there. See? There's not as much there if I come over here. So see if you can hear it. It's almost gone. Almost gone. Still a little bit. You can see a little bit of movement down here. See? It's okay, I'm not going to ask Ken in the chat to listen to this because he couldn't hear it the first time, and it's even quieter now. But you can see a little bit of movement down here on the, and it's very, very slight.
Hello, and
Very, very slight. So, but we get to run through this process again to get rid of the rest of it. So I'm going to select all, no setting change, going to do adaptive mode, and again at decibel reduction, my CPU, you can see between XSplit, which is broadcasting it, and Isotope, which is also taking that up. Yep, it's really killing my CPU. It's killing it, man. So if you notice issues, that would be why. And we'll fix that. Yeah, no, I mean, Ken in the chat says he's got a poor quality telephone headset. Yeah, no, that, and that's I mean, it's normal to listen on that. And honestly, I listen on that, you know, when I'm out and about or when I'm around the house doing chores or whatever I'm doing while I'm listening to podcasts. I don't use these headphones for that. Or I'm in the car and there's road noise. So again, most of the time you're not going to notice it, but I can get rid of it. It takes a few extra minutes on my side to get rid of it. And so that way, if somebody is listening with really nice headphones for whatever reason, or they're listening in a really quiet environment for whatever reason, then they won't hear that little bit of hiss. So I will remove that. Just takes a few extra minutes on my side. And since I'm live streaming this and you're watching this, it takes a few extra minutes on your side too. Welcome to the club. No, I figured now's the time to make little edits like that, so there's no biggie. But once this is done, 3 minutes. This is the last time. I don't need to do it a third time. I've really found that I've done it multiple times, you know, 3, 4, 5 different times to test and see the difference. And realistically, after 2, I don't really see much of a difference, even with these headphones on in the quiet, or even with different headphones. I've got different headphones I've tested too in the same way. So these are, take these off. These are the MDR 7506, kind of a standard industry standard headphones, and have been for a long time. Actually, I'm pretty sure, and I might be remembering wrong, I think there's another version of these, the MDR 7506 headphones. There's another version that's red. See, this is blue. Put it up to there. This is blue. These are the professional level. There's one that's red, and I know I had a friend that had some, and I can't remember what they are. Maybe they're studio versus professional. It's a kind of different variation on the same one, and I'm fairly certain that those red, those headphones are the same headphones. The ones with the red band, the Sony ones with the red, are the same ones that Jonesy wore in The Hunt for Red October. Go watch that movie, and when he's listening for what he thinks are whales, he's listening and he thinks those are whales. I'm fairly certain that it's the same headphones. It's just a slightly different model of them. Go watch and let me know. Of course, you know, they might have changed since the 90s when that movie was released. But point being, they're kind of industry standards because they don't really add much bass. It's kind of flat. It's just kind of good, clean, quality studio headphones to listen to check and make sure everything's good. 1 minute left. 1 minute. So, reminder, while this is exporting, next step in the process is to bring this back into Mixcraft and add in the quote effect, the quote sound effect. And then we'll export everything. Once everything is exported with the music and everything, that will export, and we'll bring that into Audition. And in Audition, we will do our leveling and then export the final MP3 file. And that is where we will end our stream, because that is the end of the editing process, assuming everything is good. At that point, I will send it off for QA, give it a listen, make sure that there's no editing mistakes and nothing that needs to be changed. All right, so yeah, so here you can see that changed, and now it's not there.
Hello and welcome.
So that's cleaned. So now we can close this. If I can see, let me close the file. Yes, I'm going to save it. It's fine. I'm going to overwrite that file, which is fine because that's the saved one. If I really need another version that has the hiss, all of it, I could render that out again from Mixcraft, but I don't really need that. So, all right, so I don't need Isotope open anymore. So this is my clean vocals. So I'm going to pull this into its own track. And this will all line up because it's basically the same thing. It's just the edited version that we've rendered down. Once this loads, you can see the loading down here in the bottom left. And done. Okay, so this is loaded in. I brought this all the way up to the beginning, and this will line up perfectly. So you can see right here, see how it lines up there, and then at the very end it lines up there, and everywhere in between, because it's the exact same thing. So I can mute this. I can mute this one So there's two ways I could do this. One, I could come in and just use this track if I want to for the quote sound effect. I'm actually going to duplicate this. So I will have the original just in case. So this is the quote. I call it reading newspaper because the first time that I did this, I was reading a newspaper. So that's what my effect chain is called. And since then, I've never taken the time to change that. So this is my quote sound effects, music. Here, everything down below is going to stay muted. And we can listen to what this sounds like. So you can see, so this is actually going to line up perfectly because it's the same thing. But if I unmute this, you can hear what this sounds like.
I fear some young persons through a vain curiosity.
So you hear that kind of an old-timey effect. It's kind of what that is, essentially. But I want to bring this down.
I fear some young persons through a vain curiosity to know their future condition have tampered.
So I don't want it to be too distracting. I don't want it to be too much. But I just want it to be so you can tell there's a little bit of difference between this and this.
Have been at the start of it all. I fear some young persons through a...
So you can tell there's a slight difference, and that's all I'm going for is you know that it's kind of an audio cue that it's a quote. Okay, so with that, I can unmute the music, save our file, and mix this down. So this is, what episode number is this? 143. And this is going to be version 4. So version 4 because of the project file, and so that way if I need to make a change, I can look at the file name and know that that is that. save this off. So this is saving the WAV file. The WAV file we're going to pull into Audition and then do our leveling and export as the MP3. And again, because this is creating, you can see it's using up system processes, which means that it might affect the stream, and that's the life of rendering. So I think I have, yes, I have Audition open. And this is what we're going to use, match loudness. So I have the settings. I'll explain the settings here now so I can just run through it. So this is what I use. I actually changed that setting just a little bit. So I use -16 LUFS. It's kind of podcasting is all over the place. It's not a single industry. I mean, it's an industry, but it's also not like there's no standards or anything. I mean, there are, but there's also not. There's IAB standards and there's all that kind of stuff. But there aren't standards for everything because anybody can make a podcast. So with that said, there's recommendations. So the recommendation is between -14 to -16 LUFS, and because it's -14 is actually louder than -16. I prefer -16. That's just my preference, and it's something that I have found to be more consistent. So what is that? LUFS are essentially what is it? Loudness something something something. I don't remember exactly what it stands for. Basically, it's the loudness level. So it's trying to figure out overall consistently how loud is this, right? So you can see I have it set to -3 max peak, so it's going to get up to -3, but overall, as you're listening to it, kind of the average, the overall loudness of this file is going to be -16. So that's going to help with the quieter parts in the episode. Is going to bump that up a little bit. The louder parts are going to bring it down to try to get it all to be that consistent level. And the key there is not only consistency throughout that episode, but also consistency across other things. So if -16 is kind of an industry standard and a lot of podcasters use that, well, then in the next podcast that's on your playlist, if they're using that same standard, then when it goes from my show to theirs, then you should not have to adjust your volume whatsoever. Again, that's assuming that they're using the same standards. But the very least, and there's no way I can control what other podcasters do or if they follow those standards, but at the very least, what I've done in order to test this is in my car, there's GPS navigation. On my phone when I'm listening, there's voice assistant like Google Assistant, and there's Amazon Alexa, and there's all of these, and I've tried to match it so that when you're listening on any of those, and for whatever reason, if some of those other voices pop up, it's not going to be like this is really quiet and you had like have the podcast really quiet and you had to turn it all the way up, and then all of a sudden GPS says turn right and it's like really, really loud, because that would be really, really annoying. And so I try to match that to be kind of along those consistent, right? So you have the volume level and you have it set and you don't have to touch it. That's kind of the key. Again, minor little detail, I guess, but it just kind of makes for a happier listening experience. And once this is done, all right, so that's done. When that's done, we take this, pull it in. So you can see here is the file. Pull it in. Run that. So this is what it looked like before, and then you'll see what it looks like afterwards here in a moment. Applying match loudness. Again, this part of the process, I mean, it's all part of the process. It's the way it goes. These steps. But we're almost done. Almost done. All the 13 seconds, and then we got to save this off, and that's pretty much it. And so watch, see the levels here. Now watch as this changes. It'll show the statistics, so you can see how that changed. It compresses it all down. And you can see this. So you can see this on, you know, professional music and all this kind of stuff. You pull it in, it's going to be compressed like this. To different levels. Rock is going to be at a different lux level than, you know, soft jazz typically or something, because they want it to be louder. That, you know, that's kind of a, again, it's an artistic choice. If you want it to be louder, then you want it, you know, cranked up by default, then that's going to be the way it is. There's a reason why in movies it gets, you know, you have really loud moments and you have really quiet moments. Personally, it's annoying, I think, when it goes right back to back, but that happens. All right, save this off as an MP3. I do it at 96K. Always do it at 96K, and that it doesn't really need to be any larger than that. It's just talking audio, and then that makes the file size roughly 50 megs. And that will save off here. Once that is saved off, give it a moment. You can see it's saving the file. Only a few seconds left. You've hung in there with me this whole time. I appreciate it. And that is done. All right, so we can close out of Audition. Don't need that anymore. And here's our file. So I will take that, and this is a personal thing. I'll take this and throw it into the deliverables folder, so I know that that is the final deliverable, and this is the file that I will now listen to on QA. Make sure that I didn't make any mistakes in editing. If I did, I'll come back in and fix that, open that up. I know that this is version 4, so I open up the project file version 4 and make those changes. And that should be it. So yeah, that is the end of editing this episode. And until next time, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for hanging around.